The steward laid the letter on my war table as if it were a live coal. "The High Territorial Council," he said, reading the seal rather than meeting my eyes. "Convening here at Ashcroft in 11 days. Routine review of Northern Pack governance. Except for one item they have added to the formal agenda." He set his finger on the third paragraph. I read it myself. The item read, "The Alpha King of Ashcroft Hold has governed without a settled Luna for 4 years. The Council notes with concern the absence of a bonded mate to share territorial stewardship. In the interest of pack stability, the Council requests the Alpha King demonstrate, at the convening, that such an arrangement is either in progress or forthcoming. Failure to do so will open the floor to a governance discussion." Governance discussion. That was Council language for something that would take 3 seasons and a great deal of unpleasantness to resolve, and at the end of it I would likely be governing with a committee of 4 advisory wardens breathing over my shoulder, questioning every grazing boundary and trade levy I set until I was too weary to argue. I set the letter down. My wolf shifted in my chest. Not alarm exactly, but the particular quality of attention he gives to a problem before he decides how much it matters. 11 days, I said. 10, now. Heron had been my steward for 12 years, and he chose his moments carefully. This was one of them. I may have a solution. It came to me this morning, somewhat unorthodox. I looked at him. A woman I know of, not of the pack. She keeps records for the Westfall Merchants Guild, travels the circuit between the 5 northern holds twice a year, cataloging trade inventories, contracts, territorial disputes. Precise, discreet, no connections to any faction here that could complicate things. He cleared his throat. I thought if the Council only requires the appearance of an arrangement in progress, rather than a completed bond, she might be willing to present herself at your side for the 3 days of the convening, as a contracted arrangement, not a deception, a temporary courtesy presentation. She is known to me as a woman of good sense. I believe she would understand exactly what she was being asked. I was quiet for a moment. Outside the study window, 2 of the young pack wolves were wrestling in the dusting of early snow on the lower courtyard, and their voices carried up, bright, ordinary sounds from an ordinary morning. I had been having a great many ordinary mornings since Saren died, 4 years of them. The Council had apparently decided that 4 years was enough. You want to hire someone to stand beside me and smile at the High Territorial Council. I want to offer a temporary solution to a political problem that would otherwise require either a hasty and inadvisable permanent arrangement, or a governance review that would tie your hands for the better part of a year. He folded his hands. I thought the choice was clear. My wolf was quiet. Not opposed, not enthusiastic, simply listening, in the way he listened before he had decided something. Write to her, I said. She arrived 9 days later, on a clear morning with snow on the far peaks and the courtyard wolves resting in the thin autumn light. I watched from the east window landing as the guild cart came through the gate. She stepped down before the driver had finished stopping it, not hurried, just efficient, the way a person moves when they have been traveling for 3 days and know exactly what they need to do. A leather satchel over one shoulder, a plain traveling cloak, wool, good quality, but not ornamented. She looked up at the hold's outer wall for a moment, measuring it the way you'd measure a document you were about to catalog, and then she walked toward the main entrance without waiting for anyone to come to her. Heron went to meet her. I watched them speak in the courtyard. She listened, nodded twice, asked a question I couldn't hear. Then she glanced up toward the east window, directly, as if she had known I was there. I stepped back from the glass. My wolf did something I hadn't felt him do in a long time. He simply noticed, not surged, not pulled, not any of the dramatic signals the old tales describe, just turned his attention toward the courtyard below, the way you turn toward a sound that has been part of the room all along and suddenly you can hear it clearly. I didn't know what to do with that, so I went back to my correspondence. Heron brought her to the study half an hour later. She was perhaps 28 or 30. Brown hair, pulled back neatly. Steady eyes, the particular steadiness of someone who has spent years reading contracts and finding the places where the numbers do not agree. She was holding a small ledger, and when I glanced at it she seemed briefly to consider putting it away and then decided against it, which I respected. Alpha King Caen, Heron said. Lira of the Westfall Guild. Lira, I said. My lord. She didn't drop her eyes or raise them strategically. She looked at me the way she might look at a problem she was prepared to work with. No ceremony, no performance. Your steward outlined the arrangement in his letter, and again this morning. I have a few questions before I agree, if you're willing. Go ahead. Duration, 3 days, beginning the morning the council arrives. Yes. Scope, I'm presented as a woman you are formally considering as your mate. An arrangement in progress, not a completed bond. No false claims beyond that framing. Correct. I keep my own lodging in the hold. I attend the 3 formal dinners, the morning assembly, and whatever ceremonial occasions arise during the convening, at your side. Outside those occasions, I have my own time. That is what Heron described, yes. She made a small note in the ledger. And the wolves. I waited. Your steward mentioned the pack wolves have the run of the East Corridor. I'm not afraid of wolves, but I want to know the protocol. Do they follow your lead in accepting a guest, or do they make their own assessments independently? Their own assessments, generally, I said, though they follow my lead in tolerating. She wrote that down too, the way she might log a relevant clause in a trade agreement. All right. She closed the ledger. I'll do it. I had expected. I don't know what I had expected. Relief, perhaps, or the flat satisfaction of a problem solved. What I felt instead was my wolf turning that quiet attention of his slightly more fully toward the woman across the study table. Like a door he had not opened in a long time, set ajar by a wind from a direction he recognized. I didn't mention it to anyone. The High Territorial Council arrived the next morning, 5 wardens and their staff, riding in from the Eastern Road with the particular self-importance of people who believe they are preventing disasters they themselves have mostly invented. They were not wicked men. They simply had authority and the habit of exercising it, and 4 years of an unsettled alpha king gave them grounds to exercise it here. Lira was ready at my left when they came through the hold's main gate. She had dressed for it. A deep green wool gown, no ornamentation, but fitted and deliberate, her hair arranged simply and well. She stood exactly where I had told her to stand, which was 3 feet to my left and half a step back, the position that in pack custom signifies a formal arrangement in progress, rather than a completed bonding. She was holding nothing, her hands were easy at her sides. The lead warden, a man named Ostrich who had been administering council reviews for 20 years and wore it visibly on his face, swept his gaze across the welcoming party and landed on Lira. The lady, he said, in the way a man says something he has been told to accept while reserving judgment on it. My arrangement, I said, which was true in every technical sense. Lira inclined her head with the precise degree of warmth that the situation required. Not too much, not too little. I had given her no coaching on this. She had simply read the room in the time it took Ostrich to dismount and walk across the yard. We walked them into the hold. It was in the first corridor that the wolf found her. His name was Fell, 7 years old, gray and white, the quietest of the pack's 3 eldest. He had appointed himself something like a sentinel for the past 2 years, moving through the hold's inner corridors on his own schedule, tolerating the human staff with dignified indifference. He had greeted 3 of my former council-recommended mate candidates with the same expression a man gives to a door-to-door merchant. Present, technically polite, entirely disengaged. He had met the High Warden's assistant, who had tried to pat him without invitation, with a look of such withering patience that the man had apologized and stepped back. Fell was in the East Corridor when we walked through. He raised his head from his paws. Lira was 3 steps ahead of me. She had moved aside slightly to let the council wardens pass, and in doing so had stepped slightly forward of the main party. Fell looked at her, she looked back at him, and then she did something that no one had told her to do and that surprised even Heron, who was watching from the far end of the corridor with the expression of a man revising his estimate of something. She stopped. Not to be cautious, she was not cautious. Not the way a person who fears wolves is cautious. She simply stopped, the way you stop when you see something worth taking a moment over. "Hello," she said quietly, to Fell. He stood up. He crossed the corridor to her in 4 deliberate steps. He pushed the top of his large gray head against her hand. I was aware of Ostrich watching. I was aware of the corridor going very slightly still, the way a room goes still when something happens that everyone present recognizes as significant without quite knowing why. I was also aware of something happening inside me, not a lurch, not a pull, not any of the violent vocabulary the old bonding tales use. Something more like the moment when the fire catches properly, and the room's light shifts from orange attempt to steady gold fact. Fell walked with her the rest of the way to the Great Hall. He was waiting outside her door that evening. I know, because I came down the east corridor myself, late, after the first formal dinner had been concluded, and the wardens had retired to the guest wing. I had intended to check the night watch rotation, which I could have sent Heron to do and did not. I found Fell lying against the base of Lira's door with his head on his paws, in the posture he normally reserved for my own threshold on the nights when the hold felt uneasy. I stood and looked at him for a moment. He looked back at me with the calm of a wolf who has made up his mind and finds no mystery in it. I went and checked the night watch rotation. The 3 days had their own rhythm, and the rhythm surprised me. Mornings were the formal work, the assembly hall, the review sessions, the council wardens sitting at the long table with their notes and their pointed questions about territorial governance, trade levies, succession planning, and the stability of the Northern Pack hierarchy. I answered what required answering. Lira sat at my left and said very little, which was exactly right, because the council had asked to observe an arrangement in progress, and a woman in that position is not expected to lead policy discussion. But she listened. I noticed that from the first session. She listened to the governance proceedings the way she listened to everything, with the full quality of her attention, unhurried, not performing engagement but actually engaged. Twice in the first session I caught her making small notes in the ledger she had brought in and was holding in her lap under the edge of the table. When she did it the second time, I glanced over, and she tilted the ledger slightly so I could see the page without making a show of it. 2 figures, circled, with a question mark between them. After the session, I asked Heron to quietly verify the Eastern Grain levy records from the past 3 years. On the second morning, Warden Ostrich himself looked up from his notes and asked Lira directly what she had been writing. She looked at him, then at me, briefly, a glance that was not requesting permission, but was noting, I thought, that she was about to do something that stepped slightly outside the narrow boundaries of the arranged-in-progress role. Your colleague in the third seat, she said, has cited 3 different figures for the Eastern Grain levy across this session and yesterday's. The discrepancy is roughly 400 measures over what the Northern holds would expect to be paying. I wasn't certain if it was intentional or if someone's records had simply never been reconciled. A silence settled in the room like snow settling on a still lake. Ostrich looked at the warden in the third seat, a man named Marin, whose color had changed in a way that told me everything I needed to know about whether the discrepancy was intentional. Marin said something about clerical errors. Ostrich said that clerical errors of 400 measures over multiple years were interesting things. After the session, 2 of the 5 wardens made a point of walking near Lira on the way to the midday meal. I fell into step beside her in the corridor. You didn't have to do that, I said quietly. I know. She glanced up at me. Her eyes were steady, but there was something in them, not satisfaction, exactly, more like the look of a person who has found the discrepancy in a document and is glad to have found it before it did further damage. Heron mentioned last night that the Eastern levy has been used as a political pressure mechanism 3 times in the past decade against Northern Pack holds. I thought it might be useful to name it in the room, with the full council present, before it became a tool in this review. It may create complications, I said. Marin has friends on the council. It was already going to create complications, she said. Now it creates complications in the light rather than in the dark. She paused. Was that overstepping? The fire-catching feeling, again. Quieter this time, more certain of itself. No, I said. We walked the rest of the way to the dining hall, in a silence that was not uncomfortable at all, which I found more significant than I was prepared to admit. The afternoons were freer. The council reviewed the hold's records in the archive room and conducted their separate interviews with the pack wardens. My presence was not required. I worked through the morning's correspondence, sent word to 3 of the border settlement leaders about the levy question, and found that I kept looking at the time rather more than usual. On the second afternoon I went looking for Heron and found Lira instead. She was in the eastern courtyard with 3 of the pack's younger wolves, all of them approximately 18 months old, and in the stage of their lives where they have not yet learned to be dignified about anything. 2 of them were attempting to fit themselves into her lap simultaneously, and it was not going smoothly, because they were each roughly the size of a large dog and there was only one lap. The third wolf had located her satchel, which she had set down on the bench beside her, and was working with great concentration on the leather buckle strap. I stood at the courtyard door and watched. She was talking to them. Not baby talk, just ordinary practical conversation. The way you might speak to someone you were sitting with while waiting for a meal. That buckle, she said to the third one, is load-bearing. If you destroy it, the satchel doesn't close and the documents inside get wet, which is a problem for both of us. She reached across, unclipped the strap from the ring, and held it out. You may have this part, the rest is mine. The young wolf took the strap with the conviction of a wolf who has negotiated a favorable settlement and knows it. He trotted away toward the far wall. The other two shuffled and restructured in her lap. I heard myself make a sound that was not entirely dignified. A short, quiet, involuntary laugh, the kind that comes out before you have decided to let it. She looked up. She did not seem embarrassed to have been caught conducting serious buckle-strap negotiations with a wolf. They wanted company, she said, as if that explained and resolved everything. I crossed the courtyard and sat down on the stone bench across from her. The two lap wolves regarded me briefly, determined I was not an immediate priority, and returned their attention to the problem of both fitting. I found I did not blame them. Have you always had this effect on them? I said. She considered the question genuinely, as she seemed to consider most things. Animals find me acceptable, generally. I grew up near a shepherd's holding. There were dogs everywhere, and the occasional traveling trader would bring horses through. I think it's something about keeping still and not wanting anything from them. Animals are quite good at knowing when someone wants something from them. She scratched behind the ear of the nearer wolf, who produced a sound like a deep, satisfied bell. Wolves are more particular than sheepdogs, but the principle is the same. Fell has not left your corridor since the first evening, I said. I know. She did not sound surprised. He's good company. He snores a little. I looked at her. Through the door, she added, with a trace of something that was not quite a smile. I can hear him through the door. It's very faint. It's not unpleasant. It's actually rather reassuring, like knowing there's a fire going somewhere in the hold. I sat with that for a moment. The image of my most reserved, most selective wolf, snoring gently outside this woman's door, while she lay on the other side of it and simply found it reassuring. It settled into my chest without making a fuss. The way the right word settles into a sentence, and you know the sentence is finished, and you don't need to add anything else. I noticed, without wanting to make anything of it yet, that there was a faint silver mark beginning at the inside of my right wrist. I had felt something there for most of the morning but had not looked at it directly until now. It was delicate, and precise, and unmistakably real. I rolled down my sleeve and did not say anything about it. The two young wolves had solved the lap problem by lying one across Lira's knees and one against her side, pinning her effectively to the bench. She did not seem to find this inconvenient. She was looking at the eastern courtyard wall, at the place where the old climbing vine had left its pattern in the stone over some decades of growing and then being cut back, and she had the expression of someone who is simply present in a moment, without requiring it to be anything other than what it is. You notice things, I said. It was not quite what I had meant to say, but it was true. She glanced at me. It's mostly habit. You spend enough years reading contracts, and you start looking for the places where the seams don't lie flat. A pause. Is that a problem? No, I said. It is the opposite of a problem. She looked away again. The afternoon was going golden at the edges, the kind of late autumn light that is brief and worth paying attention to. Heron is good at his work, she said, after a while. He is. He was worried, I think, when he wrote to me. Not about the council review, about you. She said it without accusation, without gentleness, the way she said everything, as a fact she had observed and was noting. He wrote carefully, but I have read a great many letters that are carefully written. He was worried. I was quiet for a moment. You don't have to explain anything, she said. I'm just noting that I noticed, in case it's useful. Saren died 4 years ago, I said. It came out more simply than I had expected, which told me something about the way this woman sat with silence. She was my first betrothed, not my mate. The bond never fully formed, though we tried for 2 years to encourage it. She was good and I was fond of her, and when she died it was a real loss. Not a mate's loss, but a real one. I paused. The council interprets 4 years as indifference or inability. I have been interpreting it as not yet ready to do something inadvisable. That's a reasonable interpretation, she said. The council disagrees. The council would, she said. And something in the way she said it, dry and precise and accurate, was so exactly right that I found myself almost smiling. Fell appeared at the courtyard door, which he had apparently opened by leaning on it, and crossed to the bench and settled himself at Lira's feet, with the air of a wolf completing a task he had already decided on. He looked at me, then at the empty bench space to my left, then at the middle distance with the expression of a wolf exercising patience. He's been doing that, Lira said. I know, I said. Does it work, generally? It depends on the situation. And in this situation? I looked at her. She looked back at me, clear-eyed and patient, and there was nothing in her expression except genuine interest in the answer. I don't yet know, I said honestly. She nodded, once, as if that were a perfectly reasonable answer, and returned to watching the light change on the courtyard wall. The second night's dinner was the formal presentation, the dinner the council had actually come for, at which the Alpha King of Ashcroft was expected to demonstrate, in the eyes of 5 territorial wardens, that his hold was stable and that the question of a settled Luna was moving toward resolution. The great hall was lit properly for the occasion, the long tables set with the hold's good linen, the fire built up in the central hearth until the stone walls held the warmth of it. I had not coached Lira on the dinner. She had asked me, that morning, if there was anything specific she needed to do or say, and I had told her honestly that the dinner required nothing except presence and composure, and that she had demonstrated both with rather more ease than I had expected. She had made a small note, which I was beginning to understand was how she registered things that mattered to her, not to remember them but to honor them with her attention. She sat on my left at the head table. She spoke when spoken to, with the balance of warmth and reserve that the occasion required. Warm enough to be credible, reserved enough to suggest someone who was assessing carefully rather than performing. She ate her soup without making it a production. She listened to the warden beside her speak for 20 minutes about the northern trade route concerns, and asked him one question at the end that was so precisely the right question, the one that cut to the actual problem rather than the political framing of it, that the man paused and then began talking with genuine engagement rather than practiced summary. At some point partway through the meal, I realized I had not thought once about the arrangement. I had not been tracking whether she was performing her role correctly, whether the wardens were convinced, whether the governance discussion had been successfully forestalled. I had simply been, here, at the table, aware of the woman on my left the way you are aware of good light, or of warmth from a fire that has been burning long enough that you stopped noticing when it started. Present without effort, not maintaining anything at all. That awareness, of not maintaining anything, was when I looked down and saw that the mark on my wrist had become something more. It was silver white, fine as engraving, curving from the inside of my wrist to the base of my thumb, not the faint suggestion from the afternoon. Something made, something settled. I looked, very carefully, at Lira's left hand where it rested on the table near her wine glass. There was a mark on her wrist, too. She was wearing a long sleeve, but the cuff had shifted with the movement of reaching for her glass, and it was unmistakable. The same silver white, fine and certain, on the inside of her wrist. She did not look down at it. She was listening to the warden on her other side complete a sentence about timber assessments. She had not looked at me, but I had the clear sense that she knew I had seen it. She adjusted her cuff with the practiced ease of someone who had been aware of the mark for some time and had decided, with the good sense that was simply how she moved through the world, that the middle of a formal council dinner was not the moment to address it. I did not address it either. But I thought, sitting at the head of my own table while the hall's fire burned and the wardens talked and Fell lay in the corridor beyond the closed great doors, I thought that I had known, somewhere since the first corridor, since the fire-catching moment when Fell crossed to her and she stopped to meet him without being asked. I had simply been waiting for something I could not have named. The mark named it now. The third morning's council session was brief and surprisingly warm in tone. Ostrich presented the summation. Hold governance rated stable. Succession planning adequate. The open question of a settled Luna observed to be in active progress. The Eastern levy discrepancy referred for full audit. He read each point with the neutral efficiency of a man who has been doing reviews for 20 years, and makes no ceremony of the good ones. At the end, he set down his notes and looked across the table at me directly. The levy question, he said, has been sitting in the records for 6 years. It took a fresh pair of eyes to see it. He glanced at Lira briefly, then returned to me. The credit belongs to the lady. She has sharp eyes. She does, I said. After the session closed and the wardens dispersed to begin loading their horses in the yard, Heron appeared at my shoulder. The departure is set for mid-morning, he said. They will be on the road within the hour. I stood at the corridor window and watched the courtyard preparations, without really seeing them. Her cart is also arranged, Heron added, carefully neutral. The agreement was for 3 days. She mentioned last night that she would need to make the Valley Inn before dark. I heard you, I said. The courtyard noise continued. Hooves on stone, voices, harness buckles. My lord, Heron said. I said I heard you. He said nothing else. He was, as I noted, very good at his work. I went inside. The guest room on the east side was bright with late morning light when I appeared in the doorway. She had her satchel on the table, repacked except for the ledger, which she was just closing. The young wolf's buckle strap was not with her. She had apparently surrendered it entirely and without regret, because it had apparently been worth surrendering. The satchel was otherwise intact. She looked up. Behind me, without my having noticed him follow, Fell had arrived. He was sitting at my left heel in the doorway, with the expression of a wolf who has been exercising patience for 3 days and is approaching the natural limit of it. The council has gone, Lira said. Not dismissive, simply orienting, the way she oriented to any situation. Yes. She picked up the satchel and settled it on her shoulder. Heron arranged the cart for mid-afternoon, he said. I thought I'd take a last walk through the east courtyard before I go. Say goodbye to the young ones. The one with the strap will want to know the strap is in good hands. Lira. She stopped. I looked at her in the light of the south-facing window. It was the kind of morning light that is particular to late autumn. Clear and honest, without the softening haze of summer, or the hard edge of winter. It found her without flattery and without severity. The mark on her wrist was not visible. Her cuff was in place. But I knew it was there, and I knew she knew I had seen it at the dinner, and I knew she had been waiting, in the patient way she waited for everything, to see what I intended to do. Fell made a small sound, not urgency, more the sound he made when he felt I was taking too long about something obvious. There is a mark on your wrist, I said. A silence that was not heavy, just considered. Yes, she said. There is one on mine as well. It has been forming since the first evening, I think. I noticed it yesterday afternoon, but didn't look directly at it until last night at dinner. Since the first corridor, she said. For me, when I stopped to say hello to him. She glanced down at Fell. He looked at me, the way something looks at something it recognizes. I absorbed that. Since the first corridor, since she had stopped without being asked, since Fell had crossed to her and put his head into her hand, since the fire had caught and the room's light had shifted, since I had stepped back from the east window and gone to look at my correspondence and not looked at it at all. You knew, I said. I noticed, she corrected, with the precision that was simply how she spoke and how she thought. Knowing seemed presumptuous. We had an arrangement with a clear end date. It didn't seem my place to say anything about what I was noticing until I knew whether it mattered. It matters, I said. She looked at me. The satchel was still on her shoulder. I looked at Fell, who looked back at me with the placid certainty of a wolf who has been the most honest person in the room for 3 days, and is gratified to see the conversation finally arriving where it was always going. He chose you, I said. The first corridor, he has not done that, not like this, not with that kind of conviction, since before Saren died. 4 years of dignified indifference to every woman the council put in front of him, and he crossed the corridor to you before you had said a word. Animals generally. Not Fell, I said. I told you on the second day, Fell doesn't generally. He tolerated, with perfect courtesy, everyone who came before you. He chose you. There is a difference between those two things that matters very much. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the last of the council's horses clattered through the main gate. Their sound faded down the valley road, and then it was only wind and the Hold's own quiet. What are you asking me? She said. And there it was. She would not finish the sentence for me. She would not assume or smooth the moment over or make it easier by pretending she already knew, even though she clearly did know. She would wait, with clear eyes and good sense, and require me to find my own words. I am asking, I said, if you would be willing to stay, not under contract, not as an arrangement in progress for the purposes of a council review. I am asking you to consider whether what has developed here, across 3 days, in the way the marks on both our wrists indicate, and in the way that Fel has demonstrated with considerably more certainty than I have managed, whether that is something you would want to continue. Knowing that you owe me nothing, knowing that the cart is ready and the Valley Inn is waiting, and I have no claim on your time or your choice. The room was very still. Outside, the last courtyard sounds faded as the gate closed. Lira looked at Fel looked at her. He wagged once, a single slow wag, deliberate and declarative, the wag of a wolf stating a conclusion he arrived at 3 days ago and has simply been waiting for the humans to catch up with. She looked at me. I have a guild report due in 17 days, she said. I will need to send word ahead that I am delayed. Something in me, not my wolf, not the mark, but something quieter than either, something that had been present in this room since the moment she had glanced up at the east window from the courtyard, settled into place. Heron can dispatch a rider this afternoon, I said. She set the satchel back down on the table. She did not drop it. She placed it, with the care of someone who intends to pick it up again eventually, but not today, and not for some time. There's something I should tell you, she said, about the ledger notes. The levy figures. Those, yes, but also, she opened the ledger to the last page and turned it so I could read. At the bottom, below the levy notations, there were 2 words in her small, careful handwriting. His wrist. And beside them, a date, the date of her arrival. I noticed it that first evening, she said, when you reached across the study table to move the letter. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to complicate an arrangement that had a useful purpose and a clear end date. A pause. I thought that if you noticed it yourself, and if it mattered, you would say something. If you didn't, the arrangement would end cleanly, and I would carry the information quietly, and that would be that. I looked at the notation, the date, her handwriting, small and certain and careful. You have been watching me notice something you already knew, I said. I have been waiting, she said, to see what you would do with what you were noticing. Those are different things. I stayed in the doorway for another moment. There was something I needed to say while there was still honest space for it. I have been a great deal more honest with you across these 3 days than I planned to be, I said. Not deliberately. You simply notice things, and you meet them without performance, and it is difficult to bring less than honesty to that. I want you to know I am aware of it, and that what I have said and what I have not said have both been genuine. She considered that. Was that an apology? I'm not entirely certain. It may have been a warning. The corner of her mouth moved. I've had worse ones. She looked down at Fel, who had settled himself across the doorway threshold with his tail very slightly out and his chin tilted, the posture of a wolf who has placed himself as a permanent fixture and is entirely comfortable with that designation. Is he always like this when he has made a decision? Always, I said. Good. She reached down and set her hand on his head, and he leaned into it with his whole weight, the way he leaned into things he had already decided on. I prefer knowing where I stand. That was not the end of the 3 days. It was the end of the arrangement, which had turned into something else somewhere in the east corridor on the first morning, and the beginning of what came after, quieter and steadier, without the shape of performance or deadline, without the slight edge that any limited-time contract carries, even when both parties are honest. Lira stayed a week, and then another, and sent word to the guild twice, and at some point the extended leave became something with a different name. The ledger on the table in the East Room was joined by 2 others, and then a small reference archive that Heron, with visible satisfaction, moved to the study shelf, where it would be within reach when the territorial correspondence required it. The pack wardens were, in the way of wolf pack wardens who have strong views about everything, divided. Warden Corvin said it was unprecedented, that a Luna with no wolf of her own and no prior pack affiliation was outside his experience, and he was not certain of the precedent. Warden Ella said that Fel had not made a wrong call about anything in 7 years of careful judgment, and that she had no interest in arguing with him now. The younger pack members followed Fell's example and adopted Lira with a completeness that made Warden Corvin's precedent argument progressively more difficult to sustain. The 3 young wolves in the East Courtyard treated her as a permanent feature of their world within a week. The one who had taken the buckle strap brought it back to her, which was unexpected. Heron said it was a gift, which in wolf terms meant they considered her someone worth giving things to. She catalogued it carefully in the small inventory she kept of things the pack had contributed to her in one way or another, which was exactly the sort of thing she would do, and which I found I could watch indefinitely without it wearing thin. The High Territorial Council sent word, 6 weeks later, that the Eastern Levy audit had been completed. 6 years of underpayment to the Northern holds, now to be corrected. Ostrich described the correction in his accompanying letter as long overdue, and added a note in his own hand at the bottom. The original observation that triggered the audit had been provided at the Ashcroft Review. He credited it, in a footnote that would become part of the permanent record, to the Alpha King's Luna. I showed Lira the letter in the study, late on an evening when the snow was coming in across the peaks, and the young wolves were at the window as they always were when weather moved. She read Ostrich's note and made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, more the sound of someone who finds accurate record-keeping professionally gratifying and personally satisfying in equal measure. "He spelled my name right," she said. "He did. That's more than most official council correspondence manages." She handed the letter back and picked up her own pen again. "What will you do with the recovered revenue?" We talked for an hour and a half about the Eastern holds, about the border settlements that had been paying the inflated levy for 6 years, and what a returned surplus might mean for a settlement that had been making due. She had ideas, practical, specific ideas, the kind that come from someone who has traveled the Northern Circuit twice a year for long enough to know what the settlements actually need rather than what they nominally require. She had been noting things for years, she told me, in the margins of her guild ledgers, small things she had observed in each settlement that no one had asked her to observe, because no one had thought to ask a records keeper what she saw when she was keeping the records. I thought of Ostrich's footnote and of the levy discrepancy that had sat in plain view for 6 years before she looked at it, and I thought that the pack that had once needed a 3-day contract to present someone capable at its council review had perhaps found something considerably more than it was looking for. Outside, the snow was settling seriously across the peaks. Fell was at her feet. He had been at her feet, or her door, or her side, for every day that had passed since the first corridor. As reliable as the hold's own walls and considerably more attentive. I had been slower than he was. I acknowledged that freely, in the quiet of the study with the snow outside and the fire going and the woman across the desk still writing something in the margins of a guild report she had long since stopped being paid to complete. He had planted himself at her door the first night with the conviction of a wolf who does not second-guess a recognition, and he had been right in every particular, about her steadiness, about her worth, about what the marks on both our wrists were telling us before either of us looked at them directly. I had found my way to the same answer, in the end. Sitting across this table from a woman with a ledger and clear eyes and no stake in telling me anything other than what was true, who had stayed not because any arrangement required it but because, when I asked honestly, she had chosen to. That seemed to me the soundest foundation I had ever encountered for anything that was meant to last. Fell lifted his head and looked at me with the mild, settled expression of a wolf whose judgment has been vindicated, and returned his chin to his paws. He had believed it first. Before the marks, before the 3 days were up, before I found the words. He had believed it in the first corridor, when she stopped without being asked and said hello, and he had crossed to her, and the room's light had shifted, and that had been that. I had always trusted him. I was glad to find the trust ran in every direction.